The Assembly Committee on Government Affairs will come to order. Mr. Secretary, please call roll.
Assemblywoman Anderson. Assemblywoman Black. Assemblywoman Brown May. Assemblywoman Considine. Assemblywoman Dickman. Assemblywoman Duran. Assemblyman Ellison. Assemblywoman Martinez. Assemblyman Matthews. Assemblyman MacArthur. Assemblywoman Thomas. Assemblywoman Torres. Chair Flores.
Present. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Please let the record reflect all members are present and we have a quorum. Good morning, members. As always, I want to remind you to please make sure that you are not logged into Zoom if you're sitting in the committee room, as that will create some chaos for our IT department. Members, I want to remind you to please silence your cell phones. I am doing that myself now. For those of you joining us this morning, welcome to your Committee on Government Affairs, a very hard-working Committee on Government Affairs. Today on the agenda, we have Senate Bill 12 and Senate Bill 138. We intend to take it in that very order. For those of you who are hoping to join us for public comment, we'll be doing that at the conclusion of today's meeting. And with that, Senator Ratty, good morning, welcome, and we'll open up the hearing on Senate Bill 12. And as always, a reminder to everybody wishing to testify today, please make sure you state your name for the record after each question to ensure that we make it as easy as possible for our very hardworking staff behind the scenes.
Thank you for your patience. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Senator Julia Ratty, and I represent Senate District 13 in the heart of Reno and Sparks. Very good to be with you today. Today, I am here because I am the lucky one who, when we refreshed the Advisory Committee on Housing last session, so we had legislation to recreate the Advisory Committee on Housing, and one legislator was appointed to that. I was the lucky one who gets to be on the Advisory Committee of Housing, and I was very honored to be elected the chair. So today I am here representing the Advisory Committee on Housing, and I have with me the vice chair, who is Bill Brewer from the Nevada Rural Housing Authority, as well as Steve Acroth from the Housing Division, and of course the Housing Division provides the staffing for the committee. The committee was also privileged with having one bill draft, and this is the bill draft that the committee recommended bringing forward. The committee is comprised of folks like one legislator, and it has folks who work in the affordable housing arena, and it has the housing authorities from Washoe County, Clark County, and the Rural Housing Authority. So that's the committee. We chose to focus our bill draft on a conversation in affordable housing that hasn't had much conversation, and that is the idea of preserving the affordable housing that we have. And when we are using the term affordable housing, at this point, we are talking about subsidized affordable housing that has primarily been built with federal tax credits or federal programs where a developer takes a tax credit or some other incentive and then commits to keeping that unit affordable for a period of time. And so the whole point of this conversation is talking about preserving the units that we have today. So with that, I'm going to jump in. Maybe, there we go. So again, because I know that this committee has heard a lot about affordable housing, with your indulgence, I'm going to skip most of my slides. I have them in there for the record and for the packet and to honor the work of the committee. But with your indulgence, I'm not going to go through all of the pieces about housing affordability because I believe that this committee has heard that before. So we know what affordable housing is, but let's just talk about affordable housing preservation. So again, we have these contracts between the government and private owners, and in that contract, what happens is there's a time limit. So you as the developer, you accept this incentive, which is usually in the form of a tax credit, which then gives you this extra money that you can put towards building your project. And then in exchange for that, you agree to keep that unit or those units affordable for a period of time. And so that period of time, once it expires, those units can then go back to market rate. That's the basic concept. So this preservation is an action taken to safeguard those units and see if we can extend that timeline in using other tools that we have available to us. The reason why this is important is it is significantly more cost-effective to save units that have already been built than it is to build new units. And that just makes sense, right? If you're talking about keeping a project that's already been affordable for multiple years, we've already invested tax dollars in it, we already have land use restrictions and other safeguards in place, we already have people living in those units who meet the affordability criteria, and so by far the most efficient path forward towards keeping affordable units is by preserving the ones that we have. So we know who needs it, and these are the ones I'm going to click through real quickly because I know that this committee has heard them. But I wanted to pause on this one. So if you look at, just take the top line, we're just going to take 2011. In 2011, through these various programs that help to build affordable housing units, there were 592 units that were built that were brand new. At the same time, there are credits that we can use or projects that we can use that do renovations. And typically when we give an affordable unit some renovation dollars, it extends the contract and it extends the timeline that they need to stay affordable. So if you look at the ones that we built new and the ones that we renovated, we either built or saved 755 new units in 2011. Everybody following that? Unfortunately, the net increase in inventory that year was only 273 units. And the reason that there was only a net increase of 273 units, even though we built 755 or renovated 755, is because of the units that expired. So you, this committee, have heard we don't have anywhere close to the amount of units that we need for folks who are living at extremely low income or low income. We are doing everything we can as a state to continue to add more units and add more units. But for every unit that we add, we are losing units at the same time. So since 2011, we have lost 5,000 units. We built 893 and lost 5,000. These are contracts that were approved 30 years ago, 15 years ago, and we will continue to have these problems as we continue to build new contracts. They're going to expire eventually, and there's the Greek myth of the man who's rolling the rock up the hill. That's where we are. Oops, I went the wrong way. And unfortunately, there's an acceleration coming because we are at risk of losing. We had the Housing Division do the analysis, the committee had the Housing Division do the analysis, and we are at risk of losing 7,500 units over the next 5 years. So 400 of those are 30-year tax credit properties that are expiring naturally. So they took the 30-year deal and their 30 years are up. 6,500 are 30-year tax credits who are exiting through what's known as the qualified contract process. And I pride myself on understanding a lot about affordable housing, but I am going to defer the explanation of a qualified contract process to the Housing Division because it's complicated and nuanced, and I'm just going to let them do that. 300 units are rental assistance contracts that aren't renewing, and 400 are just deteriorating to the point that we can't certify them for occupancy anymore. Okay? Okay. So I'm going to now turn it over to Bill Brewer, who again is the vice chair of the committee, and he is going to explain to you some of the preservation strategies that have been working across the country and what we would like to do here.
Good morning and welcome, sir.
Good morning. Bill Brewer, for the record. Thank you, Senator Ratty, and thank you, Chairman Forrest, for the opportunity to be here this morning. It's good to be with you in person. Affordable housing preservation is a strategy. The development of affordable housing is difficult, and it comes with very little support in terms of large dollars and those kinds of things. And so we need lots of tools in our toolbox to be able to meet the needs that are out there. And preservation is one of those very important tools. As Senator Ratty just demonstrated, we lose almost as many units each year as we build. And so if we can hang on to those units, we're miles ahead. Let's try that. There we go. So we do have some tools, and these are the major tools that are in use in Nevada to help develop and preserve affordable housing, which is the low-income housing tax credit. That's the major tool, and it gets us about 75% of the way there in terms of financing. Then we have other tools such as the trust fund, State Housing Trust Fund, and home dollars that help fill that 30% gap that get us to a project. And if we had to depend on those kinds of funds, we'd develop very few units of housing. So the tax credit really helps get us over the line, although each year we only get enough tax credits to develop just a few hundred units of housing. Not a big splash at all, but it's very important to us. In terms of what's happened around the country, this kind of preservation activity is already taking place in a number of states, and very importantly so, because keeping the units we've already invested in and keeping our tenants in those units is easier and less expensive than building new units. So just want to take a moment on what this bill really is. What it will do is it gives us time. The 12-month notice requirement gives us time to put together financing and the partnerships that are needed to refinance these housing developments and keep them affordable. It allows us to support the overall housing supply and availability in Nevada, keeps it strong, and keeps those units that we've already developed in service. It gives the tenants at least a 12-month notice that the housing may come off of its affordable status, and gives them time to find a different housing resource if they need to. And that's critically important to those folks who are already struggling to find housing. What the bill will not do is impact the budget. This has no fiscal impact whatsoever. It doesn't affect homeowners. This only affects multifamily properties that have been financed with government resources. It does not provide additional funding for preservation. As I said, there's no funding attached to this bill, and it doesn't mandate that the local governments do anything. It does mandate that we notify the local government, but that's all, and that's on the owner. It doesn't force an owner to offer rent subsidies or to relocate tenants or anything like that. And it doesn't take any property rights. All we're asking is for notification so that we can potentially put together a deal that will keep that housing property affordable. So with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Acroth, who can explain the technicalities of the bill.
Good morning,
Thank you,
sir.
Bill,
Welcome.
and Senator Ratty. Chair Flores and members of the committee, for the record, Steve Acroth, Administrator of the Nevada Housing Division, and it's my pleasure to walk you all through the bill. Mr. Brewer, or Senator Ratty, I don't have access to see what slides you're pulling up, so if you could follow along, that would be certainly helpful. Thank you.
bet. Mr. Acroth, Julia Reddy, I have you on definitions.
Perfect. Section 2 does list the definitions applicable to the affordability of housing, and I would like to focus in on one definition as it's key to understanding what we're trying to accomplish here, and that is the qualified contract. Next slide, please. While it's not expressly defined here, the qualified contract, and you're going to hear this referred to as the QC process because that's the lingo we use, it was established in 1989, 3 years after the enactment of the federal tax credit legislation. The original intent of it was to reduce a windfall to the owner, but it's actually had the opposite effect because it statutorily determines a sales price, which is typically higher than market rate, actually creating an overinflated sales price. It allows for a property to actually leave the affordability period before that defined 30 years. It allows the division a year time frame to locate a purchaser, and once that contract is obtained, the existing residents of that property that is exiting have a 3-year period of affordability before all the affordability restrictions are removed. So to better understand this and its relations to the bill, I'd like to go over the high-level timelines related to affordability, and that's on the next slide that says 30-year affordability timeline. We look at this as sort of two 15-year buckets. And the first bucket, everybody goes and moves down the same path until you hit that red bar. That's 15 years. After 15 years, some things can happen. And what we're really trying to do is, should it follow the path in red with all the red arrows, that means the property is going to leave before the 30 years. So we wanted to get all the way through 30 years. So you're going to hear two terms, expiration and termination. Expiration represents the fulfillment of the 30-year obligation and is indicated by the green arrows to the right. Termination is basically going to be that red arrow path. And the QC process is eligible anytime during the second 15-year period. So from that red wide bar on down. It doesn't just occur at 15 years, anytime after that. We are able to potentially issue additional tax credits during the second 15-year term, which in turn will extend the affordability another 30 years. And that's what we're trying to do with preservation. In the past 5 years, to obtain any tax credits through the division, whether for new construction or preservation, when those tax credits are allocated, the owner has to waive their rights to exercise this QC process. So should an owner exercise their QC option, the division is notified by the owner, and the onus is on us as the division. We have 1 year to locate a purchaser. Most times this is extraordinarily difficult due to the difference between the IRS determined price and the actual market rate value of the property. If somehow we can locate a purchaser, property then can retain the affordability until at least the term of the 3rd-year period. However, if a buyer cannot be located, existing residents still have their affordability restrictions in place for the next 3 years. But after that, the property can go market rate, and those residents are at risk of being displaced due to the increase in rent. So sort of with that background, we can turn to Section 3. Section 3 provides the requirements when an owner is going to exercise their termination rights. And going back to the timeline, this is the path indicated with the red arrows. When an owner submits a request to obtain a qualified contract for a property to the division, they must also provide written notice to the local jurisdiction and each tenant of the property. In turn, the division is required to notify our other partners in affordable housing. This must be done by a minimum of 12 months before the owner submits the request to the division. The balance of Section 3 has the requirements of the notices and the potential for penalties, which I will cover a little bit later. Section 4 provides the requirements when an owner is going to exercise their expiration rights. And going back to the timeline, this is the path indicated by the green arrows. And the balance of Section 4 effectively mirrors the requirements of the notices established in Section 3, but with some subtle differences, as this is the expiration process, not the termination process. While the division will receive notice of at least a year from the expiration date, in some cases the affordability restrictions go on longer than what is prescribed in the tax credit process, because there might be an additional funding stream which supports affordability, which goes on past that 30-year mark. And the language in Section 4 contemplates this situation. Section 5 contemplates the requirements when a property is exercising voluntary affordability. Many of our partners, particularly our mission-driven and nonprofit developers, for various reasons, may continue, to the extent they possibly can, the affordable restrictions on the property without the federal overlays. And here the notification requirements are very similar to those that have been discussed in the previous sections. But because they're doing this voluntarily, both the division and the affordable housing community are interested in making sure that tenants are notified should those affordability restrictions cease. And that the division is notified so we can hopefully find another partner and keep our affordable housing intact. The next slide demonstrates the requirements, thank you, of the notifications to local jurisdictions and the tenants in Section 3, Form 5. It requires the notification to local governments to include details about the property, expiration of affordability restrictions, contact information of the owner. To the tenants, it describes the timeline, the protections for the tenants, and a description of housing resources available to them. In the penalties, which only occur in Sections 3 and 4, both the termination and expiration section, in both cases, the division can impose up to a $10,000 administrative fine for failure to notice. In addition to what is shown here in Section 3, in the termination, those who go out through the QC, those folks will not be able to apply for any tax credit program for 5 years. There's 2 notes I want to make here. The division intends to work with our partners in the adoption of regulations for the administrative fines, as 10,000 would seem a bit excessive for someone who inadvertently misses the notification timeframes and might be their first offense. Secondly, we did not include these penalties in Section 5. Those who are providing voluntary affordability, as we felt it would be punitive to those who are really good actors in this space. Lastly, Section 6 establishes the timelines for these provisions. That was a lot, and that was a lot to unpack. I think in the simplest terms, with the most convenient definitions, I'd like to have you think of this as a timeline, as an affordable housing freeway, and it's 30 miles long. It goes from Carson to the Reno airport. You're all familiar with that. Each mile representing a year in the timeline. And this affordable housing freeway is full of developers, local jurisdictions, property managers, the state, housing stakeholders, and residents. When we issue tax credits, we want every development to get to the Reno airport, to go the full 30 miles. However, the IRS allows an off-ramp after 15 miles, so right up there at the north end of Washoe Valley. And when the developer takes that exit, the second they are on the off-ramp, they have to hit their turn signal. Effectively, what SB 12 does is to make the developer hit the turn signal before they take the off-ramp, to say to everybody on this affordable housing freeway, it's my intent to leave, which in turn gives everyone traveling down that freeway the ability to adjust to the situation. So with that, I'll turn it over to Senator Ratty for some final words.
Thank you. So I would just say it's complex because there are these qualified contracts, or they go to full expiration, or they're a nonprofit who stays affordable forever. But this bill does a very simple thing. It just requires that we get notification 12 months before whatever the situation is, those units expire. And we think that that is a very light ask for a developer that has accepted tax dollars in order to achieve affordability. No property rights taken away, no takings. If at the end of that 12 months they want to go back to market rate, they are still eligible to go back to market rate. The only thing is, if they aren't a good actor and don't work with us, then they may not be able to get new tax credits in the future. That's the big stick, if we have a stick at all, is to say, and where this is really important is it gives us the time to lean in and try to save that property by putting together another package, finding a nonprofit developer who might want to buy it, those kinds of things. And critically important, it gives tenants who are in subsidized units 12 months notice, because if you are a senior citizen who's living on $850 a month from your Social Security, and you're in a unit where you're paying $450 or $500 a month, when you go to market rate now and it's $1,200, you can't do that overnight, right? So those two things are critically important. Chair, again, Julia Ratty for the record. I apologize for not saying that. I am being called to Assembly Judiciary, so I'm going to leave you in the very capable hands of Bill Brewer and Steve Acroft, and thank you for the discussion.
Thank you, Senator. And again, thank you for always working within this realm and of a very difficult conversation, but very important. Thank you, Senator. I wanted to make sure that we didn't have any additional remarks. I'm assuming that we're now ready to go to questions. Is that correct? Perfect. Members, we'll open it up for questions. And I am checking the chat. And we'll start off with Assemblywoman Anderson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentation. I really appreciate how much thought went into this. My question has to do with section 6. I'm so sorry. Section 3.6. It's on page 4, line 39. In particular, it's the permissive language where it says prohibited, the division may. So that doesn't mean that it necessarily will happen. Is this going to be lined out for somebody, or I guess I'm just asking, will it be consistent? Because the word may has me a little bit concerned.
Thank you, Assemblywoman Anderson. Bill Brewer for the record. I'm going to let Mr. Acroft answer that since it's a more technical question involving the division.
Thank you, Bill. For the record, Steve Acroft, Administrator of the Nevada Housing Division. Yes, the may allows us a little bit of flexibility. I can tell you that looking at 3.6A, prohibiting an owner who has terminated affordability, that person will not be able to apply for tax credits for 5 years. And really, I think it has to go with B and the penalties, because we know that as we implement this, there are probably going to be some miscues and some missed opportunities. But we're going to work, as I mentioned, with the create regulations regarding exactly how those administrative fines will be handled. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. It does. So I think that those regulations are incredibly important to have, so that way they're consistent. Because the other issue that, again, and I want to make sure it's clear, I really appreciate this, because you are seeing a problem that could occur soon, and having this notice is I believe, very important, but we want to make sure that everything's really clear on it. You mentioned that there will be, the owner shall also hold at least one meeting for tenants to discuss it. It's not just the written notice, because there are some people that are much more comfortable asking the questions one-to-one. Is that also open to a fine if that meeting does not take place? Because I only saw the written notice being something that would be fined.
Again, I'll defer to Steve Acroft. It's my understanding that each of those steps need to be completed, or they could result in some punitive action. Steve?
Yeah, Steve Acroft, Administrator of the Nevada Housing Division, for the record. Bill is spot on as I read it. Again, that could be something that could be addressed through regulation, exactly what those administrative penalties would be.
Great. Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. Next, we'll go to Assemblywoman Brown May.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Brewer, for that great presentation and a lot of information. I have two questions. Senator Ratty noted that we've lost 5,000 units since 2012. I just want to confirm that that is statewide. And then my second question would be relative to the number of affordable units. Do we currently have, or are we at capacity in each of the 17 counties? The document that we have in front of us is Clark and Washoe County, but I'm curious to know, are there available units in certain areas of the state or other municipalities that are not being used, but perhaps need to be upgraded, or do we need to pay attention to a specific area in the state?
Thank you, Assemblywoman. Bill Brewer for the record. To answer your first question, it is statewide. Those numbers reflect numbers from around the state. Of course, the lion's share of those numbers are in Clark County, where most of our residents are. There are units in some areas of the state that are not completely utilized. And I say that advisedly because most of them are completely full with a waiting list. Occasionally there's a unit in one of our frontier communities, such as Tonopah, for example, that might have a vacancy or two, but that's about it. And so for someone to even consider moving to a place like Tonopah for an affordable unit is very difficult for most of those low-income households. Hope that answers your question.
Assemblywoman, are we good? Just wanted to make sure you have a follow-up. Perfect. Well, next we'll go to Assemblywoman Considine.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for bringing this bill. Senator Ratty said this is a light ask, and I think this is an incredibly light ask considering the situation that we're in this state. I do have a few questions, and some of them are just for me to get numbers on the record. My first, well, actually, let me go back. My first one is going to jump off from where Assemblywoman Anderson asked about Section 3(6), subsection 6, the division may. My question is specifically about 6A. Is there a federal reason, or is there a reason where it says that you can prohibit an owner from applying for to the division for a period not to exceed 5 years as opposed to 10 years or 15 years? Is that a federal requirement, or is that just something that came up for a reason? I'm just wondering why it may not exceed 5 years when these projects are a minimum of 15 to 30 years.
Right, great. Bill Brewer for the record. Again, thank you, Assemblywoman. The penalty is not a federal requirement, or that prohibition is not a federal requirement, but one that was written into the bill to be enforced by the division. I defer to Steve for any further details on that.
No, Steve Acroft, Administrator of the Nevada Housing Division, for the record. No, that is absolutely, as Bill explained, that's not federal statute, regulation, or anything. That is something that the advisory committee deemed as an appropriate response, the 5-year penalty.
And Bill Brewer, again, for the record, you have to look at the whole timeline, as Steve's slides pointed out, the 15 to 30 years. Once we're down that highway, 15 years or 20 years, another 5-year penalty on that effectively takes the developer out of the loop for any further affordable housing development in Nevada.
Thank you. Then are there sort of a pool of developers or could this be any developer? I'm just wondering if one of the reasons is that there are only sort of a finite amount of developers who will build these type of buildings.
Bill Brewer for the record. There are a finite number of developers who do these because it's a difficult process. A lot of brain damage occurs to get all of these financing sources lined up. As Mr. Acroft has explained in other occasions, it's a financing lasagna. And each one of those financing resources has different requirements and different requirements in terms of keeping those units affordable. And so it's difficult, and most developers just don't mess with it. And so that's why it's so important for us to hang on to those units when we can.
Thank you. Chair, may I ask a couple more questions?
Please.
Thank you. Okay, and on slide, I don't know if it has a number, but it says in here, I understand there's 7,500 affordable units that are at risk over the next 5 years, 6,500 or 30-year tax credit properties potentially exiting. Of those 6,500, are they all at the 30-year, or are some of these at that 15-year qualifying where the developer is asking to exit?
There would be some at both portions of that spectrum who are potentially or could potentially exit the program. Would it comprise that whole number of 6,500?
Is there a breakdown that the committee could see as to which, those numbers on both sides?
Great question. I'll ask Mr. Acroft about that one.
Steve Acroft, for the record, we do have that. Basically, 6,500 units, to sort of directly answer the question, are somewhere between that 15-year period and that 30-year period where they are eligible to exit through the QT process. I don't have the information at hand, but that is something that we can provide the committee.
Thank you. And then I was trying to read the chart that shows the new construction, the renovations, and I might just be misreading it, but what I'm not sure of is how many units do we have right now? I know that we need 96,000 more. I know that we're potentially losing 7,500. But how many do we have in, let's say, 2021?
Again, I'll defer to Mr. Acroft for that grand number. I don't have that in front of me. Bill Brewer.
Steve Acroft, Nevada Housing Division, for the record. I don't have that right at my fingertips. I can obviously get that and provide that to the committee.
Thank you. Would really appreciate to have these numbers in the record. And then just my last one is how many, if you have this number, or if you can provide it to the committee, how many are currently being built right now?
Steve?
Steve Acroft, Administrator of the Nevada Housing Division. Think we have the better part of about 600 to 1,000 currently under construction, but again, I can get that number to you.
And that's Bill Brewer for the record. That's a very fluid process too. There are a number of units in the application process and somewhere between that and completing construction. And so there'd probably be somewhere over 1,000 that are somewhere in that process.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the time, Chair, for the questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. Next, we'll go to Assemblyman Matthews.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, and thank you, Mr. Brewer, Mr. Acroft. My only question on this would have to do with potential compliance costs, to owners. Do we know what, if any, expected compliance costs there may be? Thank you.
Thank you, Bill Brewer, for the record. Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, Steve Acroft for the record. We already do compliance. We have a compliance team in these properties. So they regularly, annually visit these properties. So there really shouldn't be any additional compliance. The notifications that we have to do to our stakeholders can all be done via email. So we don't anticipate any significant additional cost to this.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Assemblyman. Members, any additional questions? I don't believe we have any additional questions at this time. Thank you, members. So at this time, we'll invite those wishing to testify in support of Senate Bill 12. Are there any members in the audience that wish to testify in support? So what we'll do is we'll go first with those who are here in person. Next, we'll go to those in Zoom, followed by those on phone. Good morning, sir. Welcome.
Good morning, Chairman Flores and members of the committee. For the record, Nick Vanderpool from Capital Partners representing the Nevada Rural Housing Authority. The Nevada Rural Housing Authority would like to thank Senator Julia Ratty for sponsoring SB 12. Nevada Rural Housing's mission is to work together as one cohesive team with the shared goal of enhancing the quality of life in rural Nevada. As a member of the Housing Task Force, Nevada Rural Housing Authority appreciated our ability to share the unique challenges that rural Nevada has. SB 12 will provide a housing preservation strategy that will enable the state of Nevada to plan for the future as we work together on the affordable housing crisis. We thank you and urge your support for SB 12. And Chairman Flores, this is my first time testifying in person in the committee. I would like to thank you, the committee, and Committee Manager Judy Bishop and their staff. They're great. I appreciate everyone. Thank you.
Thank you for recognizing the hard work of the staff. Appreciate you. Good morning. Welcome.
Good morning, Chair, members of the committee. Nicole Rourke, representing the city of Henderson. Again, great to be here with you in person today, finally. And would just echo the comments of my colleague from Fernley. The city of Henderson is here to support the concept of affordable housing and the tools, light as they might be. We certainly think this is progress in the right direction. So thank you.
Thank you. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Christine Hess, and I'm the Executive Director for the Nevada Housing Coalition. And this is also my opportunity to thank you so much for your commitment and service. I appreciate you all so much. and wish to express our strong support of SB 12 today. The Nevada Housing Coalition is a statewide nonprofit established to advance and promote affordable housing for all Nevadans. Our members represent the public and private sectors, urban and rural, across Nevada. We're all reading about how housing in some of our largest markets is out of reach for so many right now. Whether you're a homeowner or a renter, record high home prices, record high rents. This morning, however, I want to dig in deeper to our affordability crisis and speak to the housing that is built with affordability restrictions for our most vulnerable Nevadans and those in the workforce that aren't making a housing wage. We have an extreme shortage of affordable housing in Nevada, and although we are fortunate to have mission-driven developers that are adding new affordable units every year, we're losing them as quickly. From 2014 to 2020, our affordable housing stock remained flat. 29,000 units in 2014, 29,000 units in 2020. SB 12 is a critical, proactive policy solution to support efforts to preserve our existing affordable housing stock so we can actually begin to really build our inventory. In Nevada, we have 7,500 units that are at high risk of going to market rate in the next 5 years. And rising property values may increase the likelihood of these affordable units to exit the near term. It takes significant capital investment and committed buyers to preserve the property's affordability, and the 12-month notification requirements of SB 12 allow time for collaboration among communities and stakeholders. SB 12 puts Nevada on the map with many other states that are using best practices and a comprehensive strategy to mitigate their losses of their current inventory. I want to thank the Nevada Housing Advisory Committee, including Senator Ratty, Bill Brewer, Steve Acroft, for their leadership and stewardship of this bill. SB 12 is practical in its implementation, not overly burdensome, and yet respectful of our existing public investment and our private investment from the development community. The bill establishes a roadmap which provides a balanced approach to our ability to address our affordable inventory issues. Thank you so much.
And thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Is there anybody else wishing to testify in support of Senate Bill 12 who's present in the room? Seeing none, we'll go back to Zoom. Is there anybody on Zoom who is wishing to testify in support of this bill who has not had an opportunity to do so? Good morning, welcome, please.
Yeah, good morning, Chairman Flores and distinguished members of the Assembly Government Affairs Committee. My name is Walden Swenson, and I'm speaking to you today as the Vice President of Nevada Hand. Nevada Hand is the state's largest nonprofit developer of affordable housing. We operate 34 communities in Southern Nevada, offering high-quality homes and supportive services to over 7,900 residents, which include working families and seniors on a fixed income. Nevada Hand has over 4,600 units in our housing portfolio and another 700 currently under construction. I'd like to thank Senator Ratty for her advocacy and hard work on Senate Bill 12 and leading the Advisory Committee on Housing. Nevada Hand proudly serves on the Advisory Committee, which recommended this legislation. Affordable housing is a key component of our community, and we are happy to provide guidance on best practices. Nevada Hand supports Senate Bill 12, which provides residents with sufficient and proper notice if their home will no longer be subject to affordability standards. Like many affordable housing developers, we rely on the federal low-income housing tax credit and other governmental services to finance our projects. However, our nonprofit mission is dedicated to providing clean, affordable housing even after these affordability terms expire. Senate Bill 12 proactively engages with owners to preserve affordable housing communities when possible. This bill will give the state critical data on the volume and availability of affordable units and allow for the planning of future development needs. Thank you for allowing me time to speak in support of Senate Bill 12.
And thank you for joining us this morning. I do see Ms. Elliott on Zoom. Were you hoping to also testify in support of Senate Bill 12? I believe you're on mute.
Thank you, Chairman Flores. Mr. Vanderpool testified on behalf of Nevada Rural Housing, so the Nevada Rural Housing Authority. So I am fine. Thank you very much, sir. And I was also here for support in case there were questions about the bill and if I could have provided any kind of technical expertise. Thank you.
Understood. Thank you for joining us this morning. I don't believe we have anybody else wishing to testify in support via Zoom. So at this time, broadcaster, if we could please go to the phone lines.
To testify in support of Senate Bill 12, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits of 294, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Chairman Flores and members of the committee, for the record, Callie Wilsey with the City of Reno. That's CALLIWIL, S as in Sam, EY. We are here today in support of SB 12. Affordable housing is a critical issue in our community, and supporting the creation and maintenance of affordable units is one of our highest priorities. Preserving existing affordable housing units is a key component of this strategy, and we thank Senator Ratty and the bill sponsor for bringing forward this bill that will help us monitor those units and work proactively with property owners and other stakeholders prior to losing them to see if we can find solutions to save those units and/or support tenants. We urge the committee's support of this bill and appreciate the opportunity to testify today. Thank you.
And thank you for joining us this morning. Broadcast will continue with those wishing to testify in support of Senate Bill 12 on the phone line.
Caller with the last 3 digits of 003, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Chairman Flores and members of the committee, my name is Eric Novak, spelled ERICNOVAK. I am president of Praxis Consulting Group, which provides development finance assistance to affordable housing developers in Nevada. I'm speaking in strong support of Senate Bill 12, which we believe is a great first step towards the preservation of our valuable affordable housing stock in Nevada. It takes us several years and lots of public subsidy to plan and construct new affordable properties. However, over the last several years, we've been losing units almost as fast as we are creating new units due to properties expiring out of their affordability restrictions or owners exercising a loophole in the regulations to opt out early in a process called qualified contract. The notification provisions in SB 12 will give the Nevada Housing Division and local governments advance notice of properties exiting the affordable housing program. It will buy us some time to connect properties for sale with good affordable housing stewards and to assemble the resources to preserve some of these developments. Just yesterday, we went before the Reno City Council for Private Activity Bonding Authority in order to renovate and preserve Southwest Village, a 332-unit family development next to the Pepper Mill. The project will go before the State Board of Finance in a couple of weeks. Apart from the tax-exempt bonding authority, all of the financing to purchase and rehabilitate this property, almost $60 million, is coming from private sources, including equity from the sale of 4% federal tax credits and private mortgage debt, all new funds to Nevada. This is one of the success stories of a local government and the state working in partnership with a private developer to maintain a desperately needed workforce housing. I want to thank the Advisory Committee on Housing and its chair, Senator Ratty, for their extraordinary work on this bill, as well as the working group that made a number of suggestions for improving the original bill language. Thank you. Thank you.
And thank you for joining us. Broadcast next caller in support of Senate Bill 12.
Caller with the last 3 digits of 601, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
My name is Barbara Paulson, BARBARAPAULSEN, and I'm speaking on behalf of Nevadans for the Common Good. You have heard the data showing the negative effect of regularly losing existing affordable housing units. It is essential to preserve these existing units to make headway in Nevada's huge housing deficit. SB 12 is an important step forward in meeting the affordable housing needs and provides immediate help to individuals living in those housing units. We thank Senator Ratty for her work on this issue, and Nevadans for the Common Good stands in strong support of Senate Bill 12. Thank you.
And thank you for joining us. Broadcast next caller in support of Senate Bill 12.
Caller with the last 3 digits of 978, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good morning, Chair Flores and members of the committee. Joanna Jacob, Joanna
J, A, C as in cat, O, B, B as in boy, Government Affairs Manager for Clark County. We are here in support this morning to Senate Bill 12 as amended. We also supported the original bill. The board, Clark County Commission, supports efforts to improve access to affordable housing, and the central intent of this bill, the longer notice period, will allow our county to be proactive in trying to preserve the units that we have in Clark County and to preserve them to the fullest extent that we can. We thank Senator Ratty for her work on the advisory committee, for their work on this legislation, and we are here in support. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next caller in support of Senate Bill 12.
Caller with the last three digits of 087. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good morning, Chair Flores, Vice Chair Torres, and members of the committee. My name is Jared Luke, Jaredluke, Government Affairs Director for the City of North Las Vegas. Calling in support of SB 12, would like to thank Senator Ratty and the other presenters for bringing this bill forward. Affordability of housing is a priority for the City of North Las Vegas. We hope that this bill and the conversation that it starts and other programs that may come from it down the road further the ability to ensure affordable housing for our more vulnerable residents. We urge passage of SB 12. Thank you, Chair, for the time.
And thank you for joining us this morning. Next caller in support of Senate Bill 12.
Chair, there are no more callers in support at this time.
Thank you. At this time, we'll go to those wishing to testify in opposition to Senate Bill 12. I don't believe we have anybody in person, but I will confirm. Seeing none in person, we'll go to the phone lines broadcast. Next caller in opposition to Senate Bill 12.
To testify in opposition to Senate Bill 12, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last three digits of 653. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good morning, Chairman Flores, Vice Chair Torres, and the esteemed Assembly Committee on Government Affairs. This is Dora, and I was trying to call in support. Can I proceed?
Yes, thank you, ma'am. Please, just want to make sure that the record reflects that we are in support. Please continue.
Yes, I'm so sorry. I tried and I couldn't find my button. Good morning to everyone. My name is Dora Martinez. I support the Nevada Disability Peer Action Coalition. Mr. Brewer and Mr. Steven, I'm sorry, I cannot pronounce your last name, Mr. Steven, but I want to thank you for the compliance team of the Housing Authority here in Reno Housing Authority. They were able to help our friend who lives in one of the apartments to make it compliant for her wheelchair. So it's pretty accessible with her. And I want to thank Senator Ratty for pushing forward this SB 12. And we are in support. And thank you so much. And have a great, awesome Thursday.
Great, and thank you for joining us. We understand that sometimes there's issues with technology, so no worries. Thank you for joining us this morning. At this point, we'll go back to those wishing to testify in opposition to Senate Bill 12. Broadcast, please.
To testify in opposition to Senate Bill 12, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no callers in opposition at this time.
Thank you. At this time, we'll go to those wishing to testify in the neutral position for Senate Bill 12. We'll start off with Carson City. Seeing none in person, we'll go to the phone lines. Broadcast, please.
To testify in the neutral position on Senate Bill 12, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no callers in the neutral position at this time.
Great. Any closing, excuse me, any closing remarks you may have?
Thank you, Chair Flores. Bill Brewer for the record. We want to thank the committee for hearing the testimony today on SB 12. We look forward to the opportunity of increasing the availability of affordable housing units in Nevada with your help. Thank you.
Great, and thank you. With that, we'll go ahead and close out the hearing on Senate Bill 12. And again, thank you to the co-presenters for joining us this morning. And at this point, we'll open up the hearing on Senate Bill 138. Good morning, Senator. Welcome to your Committee on Government Affairs, whenever you're ready. No worries.
Good morning, Chair Flores, Vice Chair Torres, members of the Government Affairs. I'm Roberta Lang. I represent Senate District 7 in Clark County. Thank you for the opportunity to present Senate Bill 138, which allows cities and counties to create a more streamlined process for approving and making minor modifications to planned unit developments, more commonly known as PUDs. I've been working with the City of Henderson on SB 138, and staff from the city will help me present the bill and assist in answering any questions you may have about my legislation. The City of Henderson, which includes parts of Senate District 7, has approximately 2,000 PUDs of various sizes and ages. A few of those that may be familiar are the district at Green Valley Ranch, Nevada State College, the M Resort, Montelago Village at Lake Las Vegas, and the Tuscany residential community. Many of these PUDs are decades old and have undergone significant changes since they were first created, including in ownership. This is not unusual. Cities and counties throughout Nevada encounter requests for changes to be made to PUDs all the time. My bill would give the needed flexibilities to cities and counties when it comes to approving minor modifications. It will help modernize a section of the NRS that is nearly 50 years old, by also offering local governments the option to approve new PUDs in a single step while requiring a public hearing. Let me give you a very easy example that I use when I talk about minor modifications. This is not a process that you would use if you were a landowner building a new restaurant in a commercial PUD. It is a process you would use when you already have a restaurant open, and you need to request the okay for making small changes to the building, such as painting it a new color, adding a picture window, or a roll-up door. I feel it's also important to point out what my bill does not do. Senate Bill 138 is permissive, so it does not require a city or a county to use the tools my bill provides. It merely gives them the option. In Senate Bill 138, in addition, Senate Bill 138 does not create the new ability to seek minor modifications to PUDs. That ability already exists. My bill only offers the option for the city or the county to use a more streamlined process in evaluating whether or not to approve minor modification requests. And Senate Bill 138 does not apply to any residential PUD or mixed-use PUD that contains residential housing when it comes to minor modifications. Since the bill's introduction, we have met with numerous stakeholders and appreciate the time they have taken in providing valuable feedback on this proposed legislation. The version of the bill that you have before you today reflects that stakeholder input and substantial changes that were made to SB 138 via amendment to narrow its scope. It is my pleasure
to introduce to you the City of Henderson Government Affairs Manager, David Cherry, who will continue the bill presentation. Thank you again for allowing me to join you today.
And thank you for your presentation. Good morning, sir. Welcome.
Thank you, Senator Lang, and good morning, Chair Flores, Vice Chair Torres, and esteemed members of the committee. For the record, David Cherry, Government Affairs Manager for the City of Henderson, and I am grateful for the opportunity to join Senator Lang in presenting SB 138 to you today, and for the ability to do so in person. My thanks also to the Chair and Vice Chair and members of this committee, who were very generous in providing their time so that we could meet and discuss the bill prior to this morning's hearing. SB 138 is permissive and would clarify the ability for a city or county to approve a minor modification to a commercial, non-residential plan unit development, more commonly known as a PUD, using an administrative process. Nevada Revised Statute Sections 278A is the chapter in NRS that sets out provisions related to PUDs. NRS 278A-065 defines a planned unit development as an area of land controlled by a landowner which is to be developed as a single entity for one or more planned unit residential developments, one or more public, quasi-public, commercial, or industrial areas, or both. A city or county does not require a landowner to use a PUD when developing a property. Rather, it is a tool that the landowner selects on their own to utilize. Development in a PUD is guided by a plan that must be approved by a local government through a public hearing process. Modifying a PUD plan to allow for changes within a PUD requires a property owner to request approval from a city or county, and this is what I'll be referring to when I reference a modification in the context of the bill before you today. There are three different types of PUDs: residential, mixed use, which contain a combination of commercial and residential, and commercial. As you heard from Senator Lang, SB 138 offers the option for a local government to streamline its current PUD modification process by ordinance, which can save time and money for a commercial property owner seeking approval for a minor modification. This streamlining would mirror the process for how minor modifications are generally handled outside a PUD, where they are already done administratively in most cases. For the purposes of our discussion today about SB 138, examples of a minor modification include, but are not limited to, applying a new color of paint or using new building materials on an existing commercial building, adding a new roll-up door to an existing commercial building, increasing the size or height of an existing commercial building by a minimal amount, or refreshing the exterior of a commercial building to reflect a new tenant's aesthetic preferences, such as when an old Sears or Kmart becomes a new retailer, such as a Home Depot or Best Buy. What these examples demonstrate is that requesting even small changes in a PUD most often involves a large process because of the way that NRS 278A is currently written. That means a hearing before a planning commission, city council, or county commission, or a combination of the two, which requires a significant commitment of time and can also mean a significant expense to an applicant and a delay in his or her project. For this reason, SB 138 proposes to allow our city or county the option to pass an ordinance that defines what a minor modification is and establishes a process for approving or denying a minor modification request. The ordinance adoption process would require one or more public hearings, and a minor modification allowed by ordinance would be subject to appeal to a governing body, such as a city council or county commission, and could also involve an initial review by a local planning commission. Since 138 is permissive, cities and counties would not be required to change the current process they use for approving a minor modification in a PUD if they did not want to use the new tool included in the bill. The bill also restricts the type of minor modifications that can be approved using the administrative process. So if the existing PUD plan includes residential development, or the proposed modification to the existing PUD plan would add residential development, it does not qualify under SB 138, which only applies to commercial PUDs. SB 138 does not apply to a vacation or abandonment, or a modification that would necessitate a vacation or abandonment of any street, public sidewalk, pedestrian right-of-way, or drainage easement. Both of these restrictions were added by amendment to the bill to reflect stakeholder input. In addition, the bill contains two more provisions in Section 13 that act to narrow its application. The first is that the proposed modification must be considered minor, as defined in the city or county's PUD ordinance. And the second is that the proposed modification must substantially comply with the original PUD plan. If either of these requirements is not met, then an application for a minor modification using the SB 138 tool cannot proceed. There is one other element of the bill that I want to highlight that is not related to the PUD modification process. SB 138 also provides a city or county the option to use a single approval step for new PUDs only, and a public hearing will still be required. Existing statute requires that city or counties provide only a tentative approval of a PUD after the public hearing, and that developers then submit a final plan later for staff-level approval. The option available under SB 138 would eliminate the use of a tentative approval step so that final approval could be granted immediately after the public hearing if a city or county elects to use the authority that would be granted under the bill. Because SB 138 is permissive, this change to a one-step approval process is not required, but would be at the discretion of a local government. With that, Mr. Chairman, I would like to now provide the members of the committee with a brief section-by-section description of the bill. Section 1 of SB 138, first reprint. This deletes provisions of the plan because the current definition is unclear. In Section 2, the bill adds the word only to NRS 278A-080 at the request of a stakeholder, so that it now reads, the powers granted under the provisions of this chapter may only be exercised by any city or county which enacts an ordinance conforming to the provisions of this chapter. Section 3 of the bill sets out requirements for what must be contained in an ordinance addressing PUDs enacted by a city or county. Requires modification provisions of any ordinance to comply with NRS 278-410, which I will cover in detail when we reach Section 13 of the bill. Section 4 adds clarifying language in Section 4, Sub 3, regarding the tentative final PUD plan approval process. Section 5 was deleted by amendment. Section 6 contains one small change to NRS 278A-130 that was added by LCB. This new language reads, to dedicate the common open space. Section 7 strikes through the word work in Section 1. This deletion to 278A-220 was also made by LCB, not at the request of the City of Henderson. Section 8, under existing law, governing entities have the right to waive a 5-acre minimum site requirement. This change preserves this right, but allows it to be done now by ordinance. Section 9 allows a city or county to modify an existing standard for minimum number of required parking spaces if it is done so by ordinance. Sections 8 and 9 contain changes that are both in keeping with the intent of the bill to allow jurisdictions more flexibility. Section 10 makes clear that the enforcement and modification of any PUD plan is subject to an ordinance adopted by a city or county and various sections of NRS 278A. It also provides a clear standard that must be met when it comes to protecting the public interest. Section 11 and 12 were both deleted by amendment. And now we arrive at Section 13, which is really the heart of the bill. This establishes the ability for a city or county to create its own minor modification process through ordinance with some specific exceptions. These limitations on applicability include, 1, that a PUD plan containing residential development or that seeks to add any type of residential development, such as new homes, does not qualify as a minor modification. 2, a plan that necessitates a vacation or abandonment of any street, public sidewalk, pedestrian right-of-way, or drainage easement does not qualify as a minor modification. 3, Section 13, Sub 3A also requires that a minor modification is minor in nature as defined in the ordinance and substantially complies with the approved PUD plan in order to be eligible for the process that SB 138 clarifies. This section also removes confusing language regarding the criteria cities and counties must use to evaluate all modification requests. Section 14 makes clear that if a city or county passes an ordinance laying out how a PUD is approved, then it does not need to include the tentative approval step. However, if the ordinance does include both tentative and final approval requirements, then it must be done in accordance with the existing procedures set forth in this chapter for tentative approval. Section 15 adds the words "or final" in order to clarify that both applications for tentative and for final approval have to be filed by or on behalf of the landowner. Section 16, in subsection 1, The bill sets out certain requirements related to applications that must be followed under this chapter. Subsection 2 modifies an existing requirement to allow for an established fee to either be included in an ordinance or for it to be published and made publicly available by the city or county. And I would ask that the members of the committee please note that this section is not authorizing the establishment of a new fee. And finally, subsection 3 adds language to conform with the option to allow our city or county to use the one-step approval process. Section 17 was a clarifying change made to the bill by LCB and adds the word additional in subsection 10 and strikes the word final. Section 18 makes changes regarding the tentative final approval process to make it clear we are preserving the option to use a two-step process for cities or counties. Section 19 adds new language by stakeholder request in section 19 sub 1 that reads, in what respects the plan is or is not consistent with the statement of objectives of a planned unit development and the master plan adopted pursuant to NRS 278-150. Section 20, the new language being added in subsection 3 modifies existing language in NRS regarding conditions for revocation to allow it to happen at different times depending on whether the city uses the tentative approval step or not, and makes this subsection permissive and subject to a city or county ordinance in keeping with the bill's overall intent. Section 21. The new language in subsection 3 deals with consent for modifications to uncompleted PUDs. The city's intent specific to this section will be to slightly revise statute so that a modification to a PUD that is not fully completed would require consent only from those landowners in the PUD affected by the modification. Current statute is unclear as to who landowner refers to in this context. This change would not affect whether a modification is eligible for an administrative approval or requires a public hearing, simply whose consent is required in order for the approval to be granted. This subsection also states this must be done in compliance with NRS 278-410, which is in section 13 of the bill and references the provisions I spoke about earlier specific to residential development and certain vacations and abandonments. And finally, sections 22 through 25 were all deleted by amendment. And with that, I'd like to say finally that I am joined virtually at today's hearing by several of my colleagues from the City of Henderson. Michael Tassi, our Director of Community Development and Services, Eddie Dichter, our Planning Manager, and Amanda Kern, who is an Assistant City Attorney 3 with the City of Henderson. Thank you again for your time, Chair Flores, and we stand open for any questions that you or the committee may have.
Thank you for the presentation. And I am going through the chat now, just looking at the members. We'll start off with Assemblywoman Considine, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for bringing this bill forward. Thank you, Mr. Cherry, for meeting with me yesterday and talking through this and the emails that followed up. I still have some concerns. My concerns are just about the broad nature of the ordinance, every city and every county being able to draft their own ordinance and defining some of these terms. But I guess to start off with, could you walk me through a hypothetical if this were to pass and an entity under a PUD wanted to do a minor modification? Could you walk me through that process of how it would go at each step so that I understand what it will look like?
Good morning, Assemblywoman, and thank you for that question and the opportunity to give you the example that you've requested. With your permission and the permission of the chair, I'd like to ask our staff at City Hall at the City of Henderson if they could please help in providing the Assemblywoman with that example. Maybe Director Tassi, you'd like to take that question?
Absolutely. For the record, Michael Tassi, I'm the Director of Community Development and Services for the City of Henderson. Chairman Flores, members of the Government Affairs Committee, thank you for this opportunity and thank you for the question. And so just a simple example of this that we've used in the past is a car wash. It's a smaller planned unit development. It's a C-store and a car wash, and the car wash it was approved 20 years ago, and they wanted to increase the size of the car wash and bring it in, into a more modern technology. And so they would submit, if this were approved, they would submit an application to amend that PUD and with a minor modification. And we would look at that based against an ordinance that we would write identifying what those minor things would be. And for in this example, they proposed to increase the size of that building by less than 10%, or actually they would propose to increase the building so that it wasn't exceeding any of our current code standards. Then we would approve that as a minor modification. If from a staff level perspective, we would write the letter of approval for that minor modification. We would post it with our city clerk's office, and then we would have 9 days before that. There was a 9-day appeal period. If somebody did not agree with that approval, then they would have 9 days for which to appeal that to our planning commission. The next step would be filing the appeal to our planning commission. Planning commission would conduct a public hearing. We would send out notices in a determined radius. We would post that on the property as well. And then we would hold that public hearing. If there was still not satisfaction on behalf of the appellant, they would have an opportunity to then appeal that decision of the planning commission to city council using those same steps. And I hope that's answered your question.
Yes, thank you. It does. Just a follow-up question on that. When you said that after the letter of approval, it would be posted where, and I know this is difficult to answer because I'm asking in a larger context of any city and county in the state, but since this will be driven by individual ordinances, where would that posting be? Because it doesn't say it in here. So my question then would have to be like to every city or county that wants this ordinance, correct?
That is correct. And for the city of Henderson, we post that with our city clerk's office. We could post that online as well, since that is really the new wave.
Thank you. Chair, may I ask a couple more follow-ups?
Please follow up.
Thank you. And one of the things that you mentioned in that hypothetical was also another question that I had. It was mentioned today that size and height would be a quote-unquote minimal amount. What you expressed in this situation was 10% of what the building is. Again, this goes back to in every ordinance, every county or city that does this will be drafting what that minimal amount is. Is there any rule of thumb? Is there any kind of guidelines, or 10% of a car wash is significantly different than like 10% of a Winco? So I'm trying to find a place where this would all work together, if you understand my question.
I do. Thank you, Assemblywoman. For the record, David Cherry with the City of Henderson. I guess I would preface this by saying, to go back to what the premise of the bill is, it's really to give that flexibility to the local communities to customize their ordinance to really reflect what works best for their practices. We have professionals on staff at the City of Henderson, like Director Tassi, whose job it is day in and day out to really make decisions about planning and what's best in our community when it comes to making those decisions about land use and other things that fall under the purview of his department. When you talk about things that are like size and height, you can quantify those. And yes, an ordinance could contemplate adding something like a percentage that would say, yes, the percentage in the case of a height increase or a increase in the size of a building could be quantifiable in that case. However, you often get into things like aesthetics where you can't really quantify those. And so that's one of the reasons we wanted to leave it up to the individual ordinance to really define what a minor modification is, so that you get into situations where you have things like building materials, color palettes, signage, other things that really aren't as easy as to be quantified. So I guess the answer to your question is, yes, you could include a percentage in an ordinance, but you wouldn't have to include a percentage. You could just simply say that a minor modification would qualify at the discretion of the director of the department to really determine whether or not it meets that threshold. And I would invite Director Tassi or a member of his staff that's there present, or our city attorney, Amanda Kern, if she'd like to add anything to that answer. I invite you to go ahead and provide that to the Assemblywoman.
This is Michael Tassi, Director of Community Development Services, for the record. And just to add to that, we're also guided by our local ordinances. And so any modification increase that would go beyond a setback or beyond a building height or beyond the building envelope or whatever is established in that ordinance would not be minor in nature. And so if it was a C-store versus a Winco, those both have specific guidelines in terms of their height and in terms of their setback requirements in code. If an increase in the PUD still allowed them to conform with code, then that could be minor in nature. If an increase exceeded those, then it of course would not be minor in nature.
Thank you. I appreciate your answers. I guess what I'm uncomfortable with is that we have so many different cities and counties, and if each one of them write an ordinance and each one of them have a definition of what minor is or what all of, the things in the ordinance would be defined, without any caps in statute on amounts or a list that isn't exclusive in the statutes, I guess that's just where my uncomfortable with this bill is. I'm not saying I'm against it, I'm just uncomfortable with it, but I appreciate your answers and I appreciate your time. Thank you.
If I may, Chairman, with your permission, may I respond one more time to the Assemblywoman? Thank you again, Assemblywoman. For the record, David Cherry with the City of Henderson. Two things. First, I would say that right now, if a modification is made outside of a PUD, we do the administrative process. And statute does not put into NRS, or there's not in NRS a list of all the things that qualify as a minor modification. So we have a great deal of experience with this, as would other planning departments around the state, as would other public bodies who would have to come up with these ordinances. So there is already a parallel there where there isn't a statutory definition of minor modification per se. The second thing I would say is that, we could list, an ordinance can list a certain number of things, but at some point it's just impossible to list every single idea that somebody may come forward with, and we wouldn't want to have to come to the legislature every 2 years and to say, well, we had a situation where an applicant came to the City of Henderson, they asked for a minor modification, the statute did not say this was, to kind of met that test, therefore can we ask you to please amend this chapter of NRS to include that in there, and of course somebody would have to wait every 2 years for that to happen to be able to use the minor modification process. And finally, I guess I would say right now, any of these modifications can be requested. It's just that the process for determining whether or not they would be allowed to go forward would be at the staff level rather than done through a public hearing. So really what you're doing is you're shifting the burden to the staff to really make that determination, as opposed to having a planning commission or a mayor and council do so. And we just think that in the case where there are minor modifications, something as small as making a change, adding a roll-up door, changing the color of a building, that it's more efficient to have the staff make that decision than it is to have it go to a full public hearing. Again, as I mentioned in my testimony, that can incur a cost. It can definitely delay a project, and that can mean a significant setback for an applicant who comes forward and just wants to change a retail location to reflect the new tenant that comes in. So again, thank you for the opportunity to expand upon those answers.
No, and I appreciate your response, and I don't disagree for the minor things that you've mentioned. Those are great examples of minor things, and I appreciate those. But the bigger thing that this bill is doing is it's taking it out of a public body review, which can be longer for minor things, and I completely, like I've said, understand that. But again, my uncomfortableness is the same with, your examples are non-exhaustive and right on point, but there's nothing in statute that lists those. Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. Next, we'll go to Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation, Senator and Mr. Cherry. And I know we were able to have a pretty good conversation, Mr. Cherry, in my office a couple days ago. And so I just want to have some clarification about whether or not there's language in here that allows for the public body to engage with whatever this minor infraction might be. Some of my concerns right now, and I looked through the bill again, and there's nothing in here saying that the administrative process, once it's approved, the business can then immediately the next day go and make those changes, but then the public body wouldn't be able to respond to that until perhaps, in some cases, maybe after that change has been made, right? So let's say it is something as simple as a paint color, right? Once that change has been made, there might not be an appeal for that until after the fact. So something that delays it so that the public still does have that chance to engage, even if it's just a short time frame, requiring that there's that public hearing. And even if it's as simple as just reading it into the record, the decisions of this administrative body, just so the public does have that opportunity to engage. And I'm just not seeing it in the legislation. And so I'm wondering if there is maybe I'm not noticing it, or if there's been conversations about how we can add that in, just requiring that the public can have some type of notice before those changes can be made.
Thank you, Vice Chair Torres. For the record, David Cherry with the City of Henderson, and appreciate your question and also your time in our meeting earlier this week. Mr. Tassi did speak to that a little bit in his first response, and I know it was a lot of information he provided in response to Assemblywoman Considine's question. But at the City of Henderson, our practice is there would be a period of time Once an application was, let's say, for instance, either approved or denied, and someone wanted to avail themselves of the appeal process, notification would be given, and during the time period at which an individual would have the right to make that appeal, there would be a prohibition on the property owner being able to make the modification that had been approved. So they couldn't go forward. So in other words, if you had been the applicant, Madam Vice Chair, and we gave you the approval to change the color of the building, you couldn't go out the next day and do it. You'd have to wait until the number of specified days elapsed before you could go ahead and make that modification. That is in order to ensure that an individual could avail themselves of the opportunity to exercise their right to undertake an appeal. Of course, if there's a denial, an applicant can also appeal that denial. So the appeal kind of goes both ways. It's for somebody who feels an approval may not have been in keeping with what they believe is the best decision, or an applicant may have had a decision denied and they feel like it was unfair that that application was denied, and therefore they would be able to avail themselves of that. I can't speak to the process that every city or county uses statewide, but I would again offer my my colleagues the opportunity to expand upon my answer if any of the folks back at City Hall have anything more that might help illuminate this question for the Vice Chair. I would welcome that.
Thank you. This is Michael Tassi, Director of Community Development and Services, again, for the record. And David's explanation is spot on. Every letter that we issue for administrative approval currently, it states in the letter that there's a 9-day appeal period, and that it's not effective until that 9-day appeal period is up and nobody has appealed that particular decision. That isn't in our code. It is reflected in code for other processes. But we do include it in all of our letters that we write.
Thank you. And is that something required, like for in the NRS, or is that going to be different for every city and municipal government?
Director Tassi or Ms. Kern, do you know the answer to that?
Sure, I can speak to that. Amanda Kern, for the record, Assistant City Attorney with the City of Henderson. I'm not aware of anything in the NRS that specifically prescribes that waiting period in terms of the effective date of a decision pending the appeal period. The NRS does require an appeal of an administrative decision to the governing body, but I don't believe it has that effective date language.
And if I may
and
just...
that's in chapter 278. Sorry about that, 278.
Yes, my apologies for interrupting you, Ms. Kern. And if I may, Madam Vice Chair, one more thought to offer. I don't think we want to add a third step to what is already a two-step process. If the current status quo would be that you would have a two-step process for evaluating a modification request. If we were to go back to and place a requirement for a public hearing for these appeals process, in addition to the first decision being made at the administrative level, then you've actually created sort of more what is like a three-step process in some ways, right? So I mean, if every time somebody exercised that right, it would seem like it would potentially just add, it would take away from the flexibility that we're seeking in the bill. We're really seeking to be able to do this administratively without having to have the requirement for the public hearing every single time, unless there is the appeal. So I'm sorry, let me make sure I was just clear in the way I was trying to state that, is that we wouldn't want to add the requirement that there be a public hearing every single time there is a minor modification request, because then we're just at the status quo. What we want to make sure is that the minor modification authorized under SB 138 can happen at the administrative level, at the staff level, and then if there was an appeal, then it would go through the public hearing process. I hope that's clear, and I'm sorry if I was confusing.
And I'm just wondering if maybe our legal could chime in whether or not we know that the appeals process is like already in our NRS.
Erin Sturdivant, Legislative Council Bureau. Chapter 278 doesn't prescribe any sort of appeals process, and I don't believe that the Administrative Procedure Act specifically requires the cities or counties to take this step, but I would have to double check that.
Thank you, I appreciate that. And I guess my concern is that if there is no process, while the city of Henderson might have that in code already, that might not necessarily be true for other local governments. And so I guess my discomfort right now is that there should be something in this legislation requiring that there is that appeals process, so that if the public does have an issue with it, that they can respond to it, just to ensure consistency for all public bodies.
David, If I could just jump in on that point.
Yes.
This is Amanda Curran. Is that okay?
Yes, please.
Oh, okay, Amanda Curran, Assistant City Attorney for the City of Henderson, for the record. In NRS 278-3195, it does require an appeal to the governing body for decisions on land use made by an administrator. So just wanted to make that clear for the record.
And again, if I may just, with the indulgence of the committee and the chair, just offer up the perspective that, again, we're doing the vast majority of administrative modifications outside of PUDs through this process, and that people are able to avail themselves of the appeal if they so choose. So we do have a very good example of how this would work in practice, because it happens all the time at the City of Henderson if you're making a minor modification outside of a PUD. So we kind of think that we have a parallel process. We would just basically adopt that process to be pretty much mirroring what we do outside of the PUD now. So we have experience. I think the public is comfortable with the way we do it outside the PUD process. I don't want to speak for every member of the public, but I don't think, and Director Tassi, you deal with this on a daily basis, or Mr. Dichter, would you be comfortable in saying that you feel like the process works now as we utilize it outside of the PUD context for the minor modification done at the administrative level that we're seeking to mirror in the bill?
For the record, Michael Tassi, Director of Community Development and Services for the City of Henderson. And of course, I'm biased, but yes, I do think our process works quite well. We have on occasion had appeals that have gone both through Planning Commission and City Council on administrative decisions. We advise our applicants of their ability to do that when we deny something, and we feel like that's as part of the planning profession, that engagement and that level of community engagement and looking out for what is best for the city is kind of ingrained in our profession, and so that's something that is important to us. At least I know that from the City of Henderson. I understand that as well for most jurisdictions that we work with.
Thank you. And I do just a quick follow-up, because I'm looking at NRS 278.3195 right now, and I see that there is an appeals process in place, but it doesn't require that there's a wait time between the change and the appeal. And so, and my understanding from this conversation right now is that there is a 9 days in the City of Henderson between the change, but between when that land owner would be able to make that change. And so I'm just saying that there should be something in statute that says that there must be at least 10 business days or 10 days, whatever it is, for there to be an appeal. And I think that's the disagreement that I'm having. And, I understand that maybe the current process for properties that are not inside a PUD is different, but I think that would be a healthy change to this legislation that would still allow for the administrative process to be a little bit more streamlined and I think more accessible for business owners.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair.
And, excuse me, thank you, Vice Chair. Just for clarity, in the queue, we have next Assemblyman Ellison, followed by Assemblywoman Anderson, and then lastly, Assemblywoman Black. If there's anybody else wishing to be added, please let me know. Assemblyman Ellison, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I really like this bill. And I think it's been a long time coming, because, a code book and ordinance and stuff is something to work with. You have to, everything's different in construction, everything. Not everything in the book is going to go together in the puzzle just correctly. So you need this. And when we went back and changed from home rule, from Dillon rule to home rule, is to give these cities and counties the latitude to get in there and do some of this stuff. It was so important to where you could go in there and work, say, look, this sidewalk, or we need to add 3 more parking spaces in here, but it does, according to code, you might not be able to do it, but yet there's not that much traffic. So it gives them cities and counties that right to go in and work with this. So I think that's so important. And you still have a building department that has to go through the permit process, no matter what they do. So if they're putting in a garage door or whatever, the building department is still going to see that. They'll take out a permit. They'll build it according to what the county or the city wants. So I think that's a good deal. And the other thing that I had was, and maybe you can answer some of them questions, but the permitting process is still one of the biggest things that you guys are going to do no matter what it is. And this is just another tool in the toolbox. And you still have the city council or the county commissioners to rely back on if there's a problem or issue or a complaint. So I think all this is another hammer in the toolbox to make these processes go together good. And if you want business to expand, this is a way to do it. So maybe you can respond back to this if you could.
Thank you, Assemblyman Ellison, for those comments, and we know you have experience at the local government level as well as here at the state government level, and so we appreciate your insight. And I would defer to the staff back at Henderson City Hall if they would like to talk a little bit about how the permit process interacts with the minor modification process that is envisioned in the bill, and how the two would work side by side when you were evaluating a request, and more importantly, if a project were given the right to go forward, how, what the permits would be required and all those different things that your department deals with on a daily basis. Sorry, for the record, David Cherry, City of Henderson.
Michael Tassi, Director of Community Development Services, for the record. Thank you, Assemblyman Ellison, for the question. So our permit process, of course, is different depending on the type of change that was made. For example, the example I used with the car wash, that would take some time. They couldn't do it next day after the approval. They could submit for permits, and that can start the review process. Oftentimes with construction permits, we have a 3-2-1 process here in the city of Henderson, which is fairly quick. The first review gets done in 3 weeks. That said, there are other permits that are over the counter, and there are permits that are a little bit quicker than the 3-week process. And so there is the potential for there to be something done next day if they were just to apply paint and color. However, that applicant would have to come into the city and they would have to submit their permit, and that permit would then have to be reviewed by staff at the counter. And if with the letter that they would review to make sure the modification was approved would have that 90-day appeal period, at least in the city of Henderson, that would prevent it from happening the next day.
Follow up, please.
Yeah.
Thank you. And during your permit process, I don't know how you guys do it, but they still have to bring a plan in, or drawing in, what they're going to do. And if it's a commercial building, it's still got to be stamped by the contractor. Is that correct?
Michael Tassi, Director of Community Development Services, City of Henderson. That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Next, thank you, Assemblyman. Next, we'll go to Assemblywoman Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Senator Lang, as well as Mr. Cherry, for bringing it forward and for our conversations. I just wanted to, I do echo the concerns expressed from Assemblymember Considine about just the lack of a definition for minor. I understand with the information being brought forward that it is not, the paint color, comfortable with that, a few other items comfortable, but it is all relative. I also understand the difficulty with those items, but I think you've heard that pretty clearly. My question has to do with what I talked with you about just on the way in. Spoke with some of Senator Lang's colleagues. Has the golf course concern been fixed? Because there were some individuals who expressed concern that this could actually be utilized as well for a golf course also to be changed without. So I just wanted to make sure that concern has in fact been fixed and we can get that on record.
Thank you, Assemblywoman Anderson, for that question. I'm going to begin by answering, but then I'll also ask my colleagues to chime in once I'm done. With regard to a golf course, I know in the city of Henderson, we don't approve golf courses through the PUD process, but I suppose there could be a golf course out there that is a part of a PUD. Because of the definition because the bill restricts it from use anything having to do with residential, if that golf course community had any residential component, of course, it wouldn't be eligible for the minor modification process. Beyond that, it would have to be subject to what the ordinance would define minor as. I think I would envision it something like, let's say you had a golf course, the golf course had a clubhouse, you wanted to do some kind of a change to the clubhouse. That would be probably a minor modification if you were, again, redecorating the clubhouse. Maybe you wanted to put a sports, a golf theme, some thematic golf elements on there that weren't there now, and you asked for that permission to do that as part of the PUD modification. What you couldn't do was take the entire golf course and turn it into a shopping center. That in no way would meet the minor modification definition. That would be a major modification. It would never qualify under this process. It would have to go through the normal modification process with the public hearing before a planning commission and a city council or a county commission. So we feel as though by narrowing the bill through the amendments that were done in the Senate that we really addressed the issues. I think that some people brought forward really had to do more with the golf course communities where they had a residential component. I don't think anybody came to us and just said, we're concerned that somebody would take a golf course and turn it into something else if it didn't have a residential element to it. But with that being my response, Director Tassi or any of the folks at City Hall, do you have anything that you'd like to add that will help with answering the Assemblywoman's question?
Michael Tassi, Director of Community Development Services for the record. That was a fairly complete answer, David, and that is correct. But we were going through the drafting of this bill through the Senate process, listening to the various stakeholders that we engaged with. The concern regarding the golf courses in their minds and our minds were addressed through the prohibition of doing this with any residential component. And we believe that that has addressed that concern.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. And next we'll go to Assemblywoman Black.
So just for clarification, if a city or a county commission wanted to adopt this, then they would have to sit down and figure out and lay out the exact procedures of how it would happen, what the recourse would be if there was an objection, correct?
For the record, David Cherry with the City of Henderson, and thank you, Assemblywoman, for that question and also for your time earlier this week in meeting about the bill. Yes, that is correct, and I probably should have emphasized this earlier in the hearing, and thank you for bringing this question back again because I think it's very important to let everybody know that if a city or county exercised the authority that was granted under SB 138, the first thing they would have to do would have to be to create a new ordinance. That would be done with public input. That's through a public hearing process. So before we got any further into the question about what a minor modification would be under the ordinance, you would have the public having the right to come forward and to participate in that process. They would be able to review what that ordinance would look like, to say to the elected body, yes, we think that that's comprehensive. No, we think that there are elements lacking. To your point, Assemblywoman, it would set out in the process, in the ordinance itself, a process if there were a denial and how that appeal would be handled per se, and other elements that we think would be important. So yes, there would be public input on that, and it would be done at the public hearing level.
So I asked that, I obviously knew the answer, but I want to ditto what Assemblyman Ellison said. There are people that are elected in cities and counties to make these calls. And if we want to micromanage every little thing in every little city and county, maybe you should run for a commission or a city council. That would be my comment to that.
Thank you, Assemblywoman.
Members, any additional questions? Assemblywoman Anderson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And although I respect my peer, I disagree. If information is being brought forward to us, it's for a reason. It is because we are not dealing only with one county and or one city. We are dealing with an entire area, and I believe that the questions that were asked earlier were attempting to explain that. So although I respect the line of questioning that my peer just stated, this is our job, is to ask questions. And although it is being brought forward from the county or from the city of Henderson, this is something that could impact all of our communities. So we're trying to get this information as clear as possible. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. So with that, at this time, we'll go to those wishing to testify in support of Senate Bill 138. We'll start off with those who are here in Carson City. I see Mr. Walker, please. Good morning and welcome, sir.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and committee members. Matt Walker on behalf of the Southern Nevada Homebuilders in full support of Senate Bill 138. That may sound odd to you because residential development has been excluded from this bill, but we support it for three main reasons. One, it will increase the amount of overall applications per planning staff at local jurisdictions that choose to take advantage of this bill. As with some other bills before this body this session, we're in full support of that concept where it makes sense. Two, it does, again, match the existing process. The American Planning Association recommends minor deviations like a 5% deviation. I think that this is in line with that, where you have a business changing out its sign and it's within the already approved overall square footage, but just has different colors and shape. That happens all the time, but because PUDs are so specific in statute, we're kind of locked in and need this change for that kind of flexibility to keep folks working in the construction industry. And then lastly, again, we think that it strikes the balance and frees up space for the public to really input on public hearing items that they have that are of interest. And so as we have communities going forward waiting in line for those planning spots before the Planning Commission, this will clear out some of those minor administrative items and keep the economy churning. We think that's really important right now, and we really appreciate your support.
And thank you for joining us this morning. Good morning. Welcome back.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Nick Vanderpool with Capital Partners here today to testify on behalf of the city of Fernley. And the city of Fernley is one of the fastest growing cities outside of Clark and Washoe. So as the city council looks at the tools in the toolbox, as Assemblyman Ellison hit the nail on the head with, this is a great tool to look at, especially as we look at commercial expansion, but not overly. And as Mr. Cherry from City of Henderson pointed out, we do have to go through a public process to adopt the ordinance of what we can do, and the public is involved. And so we appreciate that. And to Assemblywoman Anderson's point, if we took out the golf course in Fernley, it'll bring out the Hatfields and McCoys. So we ain't going to touch that. So, but I do want to Assemblywoman Considine, you know, in Fernley, we have to work closely with the North Lyon County Fire Department. And we have to take into consideration height restrictions because of the fire trucks that they have. And so we try to limit the height that we go into in Fernley. So we take that in consideration. So again, every jurisdiction is different, but this is a tool in our toolbox, and we really support this bill and appreciate working with the city of Henderson, and we urge your support. So thank you.
And thank you. Is there anybody else wishing to testify in person? I don't believe we see anybody else. So at this time, we'll go to the phone lines. Broadcast, please, for those wishing to testify in support of Senate Bill 138.
If you're testifying in support of Senate Bill 138, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last three digits of 718, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Thank you, Chair Flores and Vice Chair Torres, for allowing my statement of support. My name is Wesley Harper, WesleyHarper. I am the Executive Director of the Nevada League of Cities and Municipalities. The League is in support of SB 138, and we appreciate the work of the sponsors to bring this bill forward and the distinguished members of the Assembly Committee on Government Affairs for hearing it. This bill is a thoughtful and permissive adjustment to existing law. The City of Henderson and other Nevada jurisdictions have many existing and old plan unit developments that are often amended with relatively minor changes, but the current statute can make the process burdensome, both for the applicants and for the municipal planning departments. Under SB 138, each jurisdiction would be empowered to set their own standards for amending PUDs, but basic requirements are left intact. If approved, jurisdictions would be able to outline their own approval processes through ordinance and would not have statute outline and would not have the statute outline the approval process, particularly for amendments to PUDs. Again, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for your attention and allowing my statement of support.
And thank you for joining us. We'll continue with those wishing to testify in support of Senate Bill 138. Next caller, please.
Caller with the last three digits of 087. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Chair Flores, Vice Chair Torres, and members of the committee, this is Jared Luke, Jaredluke, Government Affairs Director for the City of North Las Vegas. In the interest of time for the committee members, I want to just throw our support behind SB 138 and echo the comments that have been made before me. Thank you.
And thank you. Next caller in support of Senate Bill 138.
Chair, there are no more callers in support at this time.
Thank you. At this time, we'll go to those wishing to testify in opposition to Senate Bill 138. We don't have anybody in person that I understand. We'll go back to the phones.
To testify in opposition to Senate Bill 138, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no callers in opposition at this time.
Thank you. At this time, we'll go to those wishing to testify in the neutral position for Senate Bill 138. We have nobody in Carson City. We'll go to the phones. Thank you.
Chair. To testify in the neutral position on Senate Bill 138, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no callers at this time.
And my apologies for interrupting you there a second ago. I didn't mean to do that. Seeing none, Senator, any closing remarks you may have?
Senator Lang, for the record. Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee, thank you so much for having us here today and listening to Senate Bill 138. Thank you for your questions, and we always like hard questions because they make a better bill, and we appreciate the support. This bill simply gives us an opportunity to update a 50-year-old regulations to make a more streamlined process that will help cities and counties. And so as we make modifications to PUDs. So I urge your support. We're happy to work with you after committee if you have any further questions. I invite you to the second floor, and I'd love to come to the third or fourth floor. But thank you so much, and I really appreciate it.
And thank you again for the presentation, and thank you all who called in to testify and support, co-present, to help us have a better understanding of the purpose and intent of this bill. With that, we'll close out the hearing on Senate Bill 138. Again, thank you, Senator, for joining us. And at this time, we'll go to public comment. I want to remind those of you wishing to participate during public comment that this is not a time to reopen a hearing. It is a time for us to speak about general matters that fall within the purview of this committee. We want you to call in, and we encourage you to do so. But if you try to reopen a hearing, unfortunately, we're going to have to cut you off. With that, we'll go to the phone lines, as I don't believe we have anybody in person here wishing to testify for public comment. We'll go to the phone lines, please.
To take place in the public comment queue, please press star 9 now. Chair, the public line is open and working, but there are no callers at this time.
Thank you. Members, as you know, tomorrow, some of you may want to be at the service, and so we will not be meeting. I believe an email has gone out with all the information for those of you who wish to attend in person. With that regard, we won't be meeting until Tuesday of next week. Give yourself an opportunity to utilize the weekend to take care of yourselves, see your families, friends. And before we adjourn, Madam Vice Chair, please.
Thank you. Today's just such a special day because it's our colleague from Assembly District 4's birthday. Not only is he a veteran, not only is he an ex-FBI agent, he's also a viral TikTok sensation. and I think he dances a lot better than most of us knew. So with that, we just wish you a happy birthday, Assemblyman McCarthy.
Assemblyman MacArthur, do you have any remarks? Let the record reflect that Mr. MacArthur is acknowledging that he, in fact, is a viral TikTok sensation. Happy birthday, sir. And with that, this meeting's adjourned.